Was May 2024 a good month for films? Welcome to Cinema, where we focus on a film. I'm Josh, this is Simply Cinema. Let me know down in the comments below how you would rank your films that you watch in May 2024 from your least favorite to your favorite, and we all watch different films so we can have a nice discussion, sharing our respectful opinion of each other's comments and everything throughout. Make sure to like this video if you enjoy, subscribe if you're ready to join in the film culture community where we talk about the love of cinema as a whole. But going in last place, we have The Strangers Chapter 1. Now, while this film isn't a complete waste, it certainly doesn't do service to what the franchise is doing, really, because it's a second reboot and it really plays on a lot of the same tropes from the very first movie. Doesn't necessarily hone in on the craft that makes it make sense as something that's based on true story, and everything that's going along the lines of it. The characters are decent enough and the scares can elevate the tension a little bit, but ultimately it just doesn't have the right flavors, the right stamina, that also the trailer has built this up and advertised it to be a prequel film, while ultimately it's really just the same thing from the Strangers original film. And coming in number 11, we have the Garfield movie. One, I did not get anything that I would have expected out of a Garfield movie, but I expected out of this being under Illumination Studios, which I'm not particularly fond of, and so just the way that you get Chris Pratt playing Garfield, it's not the pick that I would choose, but it's fine for the role. But that's not necessarily the problem, where a lot of the things, the tropes that flow along the way, it isn't necessarily predictable, but it plays everything along in a safe manner that isn't particularly the most fascinating, the most clever, and while some of the stakes are elevated to this higher standard, it's downfalled by the sense where you go through all these particular stunts that is surviving through what Garfield has to face, that elevates the tension of what the villain could ultimately do to Garfield and his friends, everyone following through. And so that it just doesn't ultimately land on all its 4 feet. And coming in number 10, we have Mother of the Bride. Now this is a charming romance, just Mother of the Bride type of film that plays off some of the tropes of Father of the Bride, obviously, but goes about some hateable characters that you sort of have to get going with the characters. And while I do like the atmosphere that is built up, and it goes about crazy circumstances that you can sort of suspend disbelief just for having the time of your life with this film. Obviously, it's not really a great film that's trying to be extravagant and make sense in all of its quirks and zanies, but overall, I'm still going to be maybe watching this every once in a while, if not enjoying the time that I had with it now. And coming in number 9, we have If. Now this is a film that is fun for the kids, for the family, but ultimately has some comedy that just doesn't always work its own wonder, and has a lack of imagination where it sort of explores that realm of answering some questions here and there, but ultimately doesn't have the great scale to what you could do with the imagination, whether exploring this whole world, explaining all the reasons these characters attach to this, and it has sort of a split between the first half and the second half, what your main focus is with what we're doing with these imaginary friends, and loses focus and insight into how you're really expanding upon the problem that we have from the very beginning. And coming in number 8, we have Dragon Keeper, a foreign film that in my theaters it was played only in English, but ultimately it's clever and fun, and it has some tropes that are generally familiar with this franchise, but the colors and everything that goes about with the animation is smooth and free-flowing that I can just enjoy for the culture that they build up. It plays along these troubled things and things that just don't always make sense for these characters that can do things that they shouldn't be for their size, but for being animation, I can kind of expect that. And for being a kid's film, it has those crazy clever laughs that can pull you into the film, into the atmosphere that has a great lore built into the film as a whole. Coming in number 7, we have Sight, a faith-based film that is not trying to spread any strong message in your face if you're not a Christian or anything along the lines of that. It's based on a true story of Ming Wang, this Chinese immigrant that goes to America after going through this cultural revolution in his hometown and has to go about trying to become a doctor in the United States and becomes an eye surgeon that sort of cures blindness in different ways. And the way they go about it, it has those sappy moments, especially near the end, once you build up certain stakes and certain elements that really bounces in on the hope that it can provide for the people that has in real life. But ultimately, there's quite a bit of flashbacks that can interrupt the flow, and I see where some things are necessary, what they do with the flashbacks, and it's clever with the flow that has leading from the present to the past. But ultimately, there's certain aspects to that it leaves certain questions left out or unanswered, and it answers questions that we don't necessarily need or have for it, and has a couple different subplots that feel less necessary for the story that's being told, even if it's part of the history. The part of the narrative as a whole kind of has a little bit of a focus gap between different things that bounces off of. Next up, we have Turtles All the Way Down, one that is really exploratory to the nature of OCD and the way that it expands upon that mindset, the clever uses of vagueness to the cinematography and everything what it does with that. It's good because I have a brother that has OCD, and so putting that to film, I love the nature of what they're doing with mental illnesses put to screen and making insight and awareness to these type of things. And I feel this film was overlooked and really recommended for what I'm wanting to look into this type of film. Just the way they build up the relationships, the chemistry, and while it does lose focus at certain times with certain subplots or what they introduce us into the crime sort of world that they start off with, just it does a little bit of different side quests at certain times, but its overall atmosphere, its nature of being down to earth, exploring this girl who just has some trouble dealing with bacteria and everything with all of her different problems, just with everything that's happening within her mind, you can really get empathetic with the character for everything she is facing and feel like she has to battle within her own mind and can often lose for the own mindset that it often tackles over her. And so I honestly would recommend this film over anything else that you may have already seen before. And before we go to my top 5, make sure to comment down below your favorite movies that you watched back in May 2024, from your least favorite to your favorite, and we can all share what we watched and how we like these films as a whole. But going into my top 5, we have Furiosa, one that I expected a bit more, at least for the energy provided. It is grand by its cinematography. George Miller is once again a great director. Anya Taylor-Joy is fantastic as just what she's bringing for Furiosa as a character, and the buildup of culture and the exploration of these worlds, all these cultures that you're building up in all of these different settings is intriguing and fascinating by the fullest extent that it can bring. But there's ultimately a length this film offers that is a bit too long for its own means. It doesn't feel like anything should be left out, and so that's the complication that I have with my opinions with this film. Maybe a rewatch will do it service to where my understanding lies within what this film has and why it should be so long for at least what George Miller's vision would be. But ultimately, there's so much that this film unpacks that it's at least hard to manage everything, and feeling like it deserves such a long runtime for everything that it really unpacks and just everything that it just puts upon us, even for as good of a film as it is, by the visuals, by its storytelling, and the cultural insight as a whole, that ultimately leaves me mixed, even if it is still leaving me on a more positive note for this film as a whole. But going into my 4, we have The Fall Guy, one I enjoy for the nature of what you're getting out of Ryan Gosling, Emily Blunt, their chemistry on screen as a romance. It's really good, and it has a mix of genres, but ultimately is more of a love letter to the sentiment of cinematography and films as a whole, and how they go about that, playing that into the story. David Leitch is a fantastic director because he came off of being a stuntman to become a director within John Wick and 5 films since. So just what they do with the story, it's fun. It goes about things that you have to suspend your disbelief because it's not completely playing things down to earth. It just plays into the love of cinema with all of these different movie sets they create, these different schemes to catch these criminals based on a killing that is going on, and so how that all plays, mixing multiple genres at once while filming a meta movie within the movie itself, just becomes a good blast and a fun time to be had as a whole. And coming in number 3, we have Backspot, one that released in the last half of the month that I wish I got to see in cinemas, but it didn't come to my movie theater and I had to rent it. That it's still really grand on its own screen. It almost plays along the tropes of Challengers or even Whiplash with the obsession and pulling it into sports, but this is about a cheerleading squad. It's crazy and clever with its cinematography, with the way it utilizes its camera movement, while also being basic in some scenes that can be toned down. And the cheerleading thing, you can't necessarily always get into the obsession you have, but you can have a newfound appreciation for what cheerleaders do, what they have to put themselves through, and certain things that become hard-toned with the teachers and everything that comes about. And while this is a LGBTQ type of film that can turn some people off, I still feel like it deserves its own attention for what it offers as a whole, pulling in some great stunts, some interesting cinematography movement with how they utilize some Disney or obsession with the sport, and how they pull that about along the way, create some great performance and a good time overall. And at number 2, we have Ezra. I enjoy this film just for how they explore this obsession with these mental disorder, autistic adventure, essentially, for this father that is trying to raise his kid while also co-parenting with his ex-wife, that she is getting a new relationship, and how there's different complications along the way. It's not easy to raise an autistic kid, but also seeing the insight for autism, just like I mentioned with Turtles All the Way Down, how they mention OCD, they're bringing autism to the insight. And while it doesn't do anything super special with its camera movements, everything that it's doing with its story, it's still fun. It's a little sappy, but I still enjoy the nature, what it's pulling out of its own story ropes, and how they're building upon these characters with a great cast. There's Robert De Niro and some great side cast members with Vera Farmiga and Rainn Wilson. What they have as a whole just pulls out some good performances, a good, decent story, and while it is slow to some nature of the film, it does have that special treat of being slow that makes it feel more down to earth. And while you have to sit through a bit more, it feels like it earns all of its right to be the pacing that it has and offer all the story beats that makes it click as a whole. But that leaves at number 1, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. And while now this isn't a stellar number 1 for what I've seen in the past few months of the year, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes is extraordinary for the nature of what it pulls out of the nature of continuing this franchise in a whole different sort of direction, creating all these cast members generations after what we got from the previous Planet of the Apes trilogy, and exploring all the Planet of the Apes movies for the first time was just really grand, but pulling into this one was just extra special for the nature of what they do, having all these questions about how culture changes over time now that there's significantly less humans on Earth and the reign of Caesar is over for generations. There's questions about how Caesar's reign gets twisted for those that still remember him, and there's also different communities that don't know anything about him that we're bringing in this main character that we're following, and how they play all that throughout this pretty lengthy runtime is still fairly well earned for the nature of what it pulls in, how it answers all its questions, and what they bring in with the characters and the humans as a whole, introducing us to something that sets up some future films, but is also self-contained within the own nature of what it all has to answer for all the elements that it has with its questions as a whole, making it my #1 film that I watched in May 2024. Make sure to comment down below what movies you watched in May 2024, what I missed that I should be watching, and how you would rank them from your least favorite to your favorite. Make sure to like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe when you're ready to join in the film culture community where we talk about the love of cinema as a whole. But as always, make sure to do yourself a favor and go watch a movie.